One of the many things I love about the Fire Emblem series is its wild and wacky unused content. And Thracia is the wildest and wackiest Fire Emblem out there, so you know its unused content is going to be good. Most of this information comes from the cutting room floor and Serenade's forest. First up, Thracia has some of the most interesting unused items and weapons in the entire series. Gevolg and Gungnir, the legendary spears of Njorun and Dane, founders of North and South Thracia respectively, exist in the code and are fittingly overpowered, perhaps even more so than they were in Genealogy. The former has 1 to 2 range, strength plus 10, and gives Charm, Vantage, Wrath, and Nile, while the latter only has 1 range but has 70 crits, and gives Paragon instead of Charm. These have fully functional animations, but what's interesting is they have the holy weapon Flash from Genealogy, which Forseti, another holy weapon from Genealogy, lacks even in the final game. I have a weird theory about these weapons. With their ridiculous stat lines, and the fact Gungnir's description roughly translates as, "Hey you, please stop hacking the game," I wonder if these were debug weapons used during testing. The Darkness Lance has 20 might, 1 to 2 range, and 60 uses, and gives the Nile skill. Ridiculous might aside, this resembles Marita's Darkness Sword, so maybe there was a lance equivalent, or it was originally going to be a lance. Interestingly, Volta's backstory in Sacred Stones involves being corrupted by a cursed spear. Though I doubt that's an intentional reference to cut content from earlier in the series. But this weapon is cursed both in and out of universe because of that broken description. We'll be seeing this on a few other unused weapons, and it means if you try and read the weapon's description on the stat screen, it won't properly display and the game's pixels will start glitching out. Ballistas in Thracia already come in regular, iron, and venom varieties, but there's an unused killer ballista weapon, only usable by the equally unused killer ballista class. This is one of the most complete unused weapons. It has the high crit rate you'd expect, its flyer effectiveness works correctly, and both of these are mentioned in the weapon's description, and unlike examples we'll see later, it's not lying. Maybe they just thought there were too many ballistas in Thracia as is. Wouldn't surprise me. Now on to unused tomes. There's 5 of these, 2 regular and 3 legendary. All of them have glitchy, unfinished animations, but still do damage correctly. Bolganone and Aura were intended to be A-rank fire and light tomes respectively. They have unfinished looking stats and broken descriptions. With Aura cut, there's actually no benefit to getting an A in light tomes. The highest ranked one in the final game is Nosferatu at B. The 3 legendary ones are all from Genealogy: Valflame, Mjolnir, and Loptus. Valflame and Loptus have pref weapon locks, but no character is assigned to them. Presumably these would have been for Arvis and Julius. Julius has unused data, but he doesn't have Loptus access. Mjolnir I'll get to later. But it and Loptus have claimed secondary effects in their descriptions that aren't actually programmed. Thracia had its fair share of insane utility styles, but would you believe there were even more planned? The first is Return, returning, from Genealogy. In that game, it sends a unit back to your home castle, but in this one, it makes the targeted ally escape the map. I assume it only works in escape chapters. Not sure how useful this would be, but it could have saved you some time. The Watchstaff temporarily reveals the inside of closed rooms without unlocking the door. Presumably so you can see what enemies are inside and prepare. I'm glad this was cut because there are very few of these rooms in the game, and by the time you reach most of them, you have the unlock staff. This staff would also appear as an unused item in Binding Blade, and I'm convinced it never made a legit appearance, but looking into things, it actually did. It was in Mystery of the Emblem? Finally, some unused items. The first is the Master Seal, whose naming might confuse people who played the fan translation. I'll get to that in a moment. But this unused item is actually its first appearance in the series, and in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, its menu sprite resembles this one. It doesn't have an effect if hacked into the game. In the final version of Thracia, promotable units level 10 and above promote with an item called the Knight Proof in Japanese, which the fan translation renames to Master Seal because that's what universal promotion items are called in all future games. But it's still interesting that name started on an unused item. Me and Post adding a bit more trivia here. Knight's Proof is not the name of the Knight's Crest from earlier games. That one is called Knight's Medal in kanji. Making things more confusing, the unused Thracia Master Seal sprite became the basis of the Knight's Crest in the GBA games, while the GBA Hero Crest is based on Thracia's Knight Proof. Then there are two unused skill manuals. These actually are fully functional if hacked in, Bargain and Miracle. I'm glad Bargain got cut because it would have made Shanum's one use also redundant, and Miracle may have been too powerful on certain characters. Finally, there are two unused item strings, though no items or any other data is attached to them. The first is Brionac, which is a Mandela effect weapon from Japanese culture. A 1990 book called Truth in Fantasy 6 claimed that it was the name of Lu's spear in Irish mythology. And because fact-checking was harder back then due to the lack of internet, the name spread to many JRPGs. Myself, I remember it from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Trails of Cold Steel. Given the fake myth, this was probably a spear. And in fact, it was a spear when it finally appeared for real later in the series in Tokyo Mirage Sessions. You thought I was gonna say Engage, but this version predates that one. But yeah, it was a spear in Engage too. The second one though, I have no idea. The second part of this word, Esurin, is identical to the Japanese spelling of Leif's mother and Sigurd's sister, Ethlin. So maybe this was a personal weapon for Leif? In addition to the unused weapons with pref locks, there are a few pref locks themselves that are unused in the game's code. These have no weapons or items assigned to them, but I have a good guess as to what some of them might have been. I want to stress though, they are just guesses. The first lock is for Halvin, and this makes me really sad. Ossian got a pref weapon for visiting his house that made him amazing. Halvin got an amazing brave axe for visiting his house, but it wasn't a pref weapon. You could just give it to Ossian, or Dagdar, or Marty. The brave axe had an unusually low weapon rank for a brave weapon, and that's probably a remnant of it originally being exclusive to Halvin, which would have given him a distinct identity. Another lock is for Galzus. Yep, as if he needed to be any stronger, he originally had a pref weapon. I can't even begin to think of what this would have done. The other single weapon lock is for Pern, and given that the Kingmaker has 60 uses like all other pref weapons, and you only get one of it, it's likely it was originally exclusive to Pern. Another lock is assigned to Sleuth, Sarah, Cohen, the boss of Chapter 22, and two generic Frigga priests from Chapter 20. I suspect this would have been some staff, possibly Berserk. Though I read something horrifying online. All of these units have restore staves in their starting inventories. What if the ability to queue a status was a character-locked thing? And 3 of those locks were for enemies. Finally, there's a weapon lock for Lenoan, Sarah, and Canis, the Dead Lord clone of Sarah. Given Lenoan's Naga blood, her importance to the story, and her being a guaranteed join, I wonder if the Kia staff was originally usable by her too. This last fact about pref weapons isn't exactly unused. There are a few generic enemies who have access to the party's pref weapons, a random Berserker with Ossian's Vouge, several random enemies with the unlock staff, but did you know that this specific Loptrian with the Fortify staff, in the room of status staff Loptrians in Chapter 24, can use Tina's Thief Staff? And yes, this is fully functional. If you reverse steal it into his inventory, he will use it against you. I'm guessing this enemy originally had a Thief Staff, but Kaga either A, realized that was too sadistic even for him, or B, didn't want you to have 2 copies of the Thief Staff. Or C, somebody tested the game and realized that could happen. There's exactly one unused skill in the game. Its name is Immortal, or literally Never Die, and its description says that it prevents the unit from, well, dying. While I like to borrow this skill's name to refer to the mechanic on certain units like Avol that stops them from being killed, that's not officially a skill effect. But what's really weird is the actual effect of the Immortal skill if hacked in is something entirely different. It lets the unit traverse walls and outdoor buildings at a large movement cost, while losing the ability to traverse mountains. This is a very interesting movement type that I wish was used as an enemy gimmick, though it would only make sense for something that can climb walls or some kind of ghost. And now my favourite part of most games' unused content, Unused Characters. Most of these characters do not have set levels, which may have been done to allow for boss auto-leveling. For these ones, I've listed their level as question mark. The first unused character is Gunnar, and there's evidence he's a scrapped playable character, because he has death and escape quotes. In his death quote, he mentions Asbel, and Asbel's ending in the final game says that his father was a bishop. It's likely this is him. His growth seemed like a placeholder, so he was probably scrapped early, but I wonder when he would have joined. His magic base is very high and he has good weapon ranks, but his speed is very low. He also doesn't have a support with Asbel coded in. Next is Julius, and no, your eyes aren't fooling you. A lot of these unused characters have the wrong portrait. There are 2 versions of Julius. The first has the renewal skill, the only other person with this in the final game is Veld, while the second has Julia's portrait, the Dark Prince class from Genealogy, and no growths or skills. This data probably exists just so Julius can appear on the map for cutscenes at the end of Chapter 4 and 21X. His map sprite there is from the unused Dark Prince class. Interestingly, the Julia portrait version is the one that's used in cutscenes, and has Julius's name written the way it is in Genealogy, Yuriusu. The Sias version is instead written Juriasu. Jabal is a pirate with fairly low stats and the portrait of one of Lithas's generic henchmen. It's possible he would have been a boss in Chapter 2X, given Lithas himself is a joke and you're not meant to fight Shiva. Ishtar is the most complete unused character. Her stats, skills, weapon ranks, and other data all make sense. And she has exclusive access to the unused Mjolnir tome. The only thing bugged are its animations and stat boost. Some alleged unused dialogue implies she would have been a boss in Chapter 19, which would have given an already epic chapter an even greater sense of urgency. I'm sad this was cut. These unused quotes contain lines for when she shows up, battle dialogue, but no defeat or capture lines, implying she was going to be unbeatable. Just like Julius, Travant and the following unused character likely exist for the sake of cutscenes, but they've got stats coded anyway, and they're insane. Adept, Vantage, Nile, 25% Vigor. I wish Leaf got to fight this guy in Thracia. His son Arion lacks Vantage, but has higher magic, luck, and weapon ranks. And yes, you are reading that correctly, all sources say he has a 9 times follow-up critical modifier. Both him and Travant have the unused Dragon Lord class, which has that head armor none of the other Wyvern classes do. Next we come to assorted unused chump bosses. Spool is a baron. Kant, named after the German philosopher, is a general, despite reusing a mage's portrait. Mannheim is another general. Orvis is a Draco rider with the same portrait as a bunch of bandits. Rilke reuses Kemp's portrait and is named after the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke. And Big Bad Manfroy himself, who somehow has Machua's portrait. Finally, there are some unused character portraits with no corresponding stats. Arthur from Genealogy, along with Acello, Daisy, Jean, and what is probably Hermina. Aside from Arthur, these are all substitute characters from Genealogy, implying that the substitutes would have played a role in Thracia's story. Possibly depicting a world where both the main and substitute children are canon, and the substitutes are having their own adventures during Genealogy's events. The other unused portraits are less interesting, they're just recolors of various bosses. Now, if you're thinking some of these aren't unused, that's because the most complete translation patch repurposes some of these for Xavier's lieutenants. There's also a bunch of unused generic portraits in the game. Most of these are taken from Genealogy of the Holy War, coming from classes that aren't used or aren't encountered as generics. The generic civilian portrait from Genealogy also appears, but all civilians in Thracia use actual NPC portraits. There's also a totally new generic class portrait that's unused in Thracia's data, and it looks a lot like Julius's Dark Prince class. Thracia also has some fully unused classes. All of them have map sprites at least, though most don't have battle sprites, and the few that do are often glitchy. They also all have base stats and base weapon ranks. The base stats are often wrong and don't mean much, so I won't be including them here. Firstly, Dragon Lord and Dark Prince are, as I discussed earlier, all used by unused characters who appear in cutscenes. Travant, Arione, and Julius. But despite not appearing on the map, Selif's Junior Lord and Night Lord classes also have unused data. What's most interesting is that Night Lord is able to use staves while dismounted, something it couldn't do in Genealogy, though its base staff rank is E, so Selif wouldn't be breaking the game anytime soon. The legendary Master Knight class, Leaf's original promotion, also has map sprites in the game's data, and for some reason it lost the ability to use light magic since Genealogy. And, very disappointingly, it can only use swords while dismounted. Falcon Knight also appears as an unused class. If you're confused because Pegasus Knights still appear in this game and can promote, the class tiers go Pegasus Rider, Pegasus Knight in Thracia. Falcon Knight is unusable, but if it was, it retained its ability to use staves from Genealogy, which would have been hilarious in Thracia, and speaking of hilarious, it now has Miracle as a class skill. Another class from Genealogy, Forest, is also unused. Its male form keeps its Genealogy sprite, but its female form has been replaced with the female mercenary one. Which it basically is in all but name. It's able to use axes here, which it couldn't in Genealogy. The Emperor class from Genealogy is also unused, but it's lost its ability to use magic. It does still have Charm and Pavise as class skills though. The Killer Ballista, which is the only class able to use the unused Killer Ballista weapon. I'm sure many Thracia fans are breathing a sigh of relief that this got cut. There's an unused class based on how mages looked in Genealogy. Thracia revamped their appearances. And female Loprian mages. They have their own map sprite, base stats, and a higher base rank in fire than male Loprians. I guess they've apprenticed under Arvis. There's a lot of interesting unused text in Thracia. The first of this comes from the main story, though I will say, take this with a grain of salt. I found all of this on Serenade's Forest. It's been there for years, but I can't find any real citation for how and when this information was discovered. Firstly, dialogue suggesting there was going to be a boss in Chapter 4X, Hero on the Wind. This makes sense, as I always found it weird that this map had no boss at all, not even a generic like 24x. Dialogue between Raedric and Eloptrian in Chapter 6, suggesting Loptrian reinforcements were going to appear that wielded powerful magic that could cause damage to the city. Fenrir tomes, perhaps? Fred and Olwen have unused lines in Chapter 8 for if you disarm them, it would have made them automatically retreat the map. From what I hear, disarming them in the final game causes them to buy new weapons from the nearest weapon shop. Chapter 12 might have had another village that would have rewarded you for saving an NPC in 11x. There would have been more dialogue with Chapter 20's boss, making his AI behavior later in the map a lot more explicit. To everyone's horror, there's evidence of another boss in Chapter 22, you know, the Reinhardt map. And what's very interesting are some boss lines for the final chapter that are written in katakana. Every other boss that speaks this way in Fire Emblem has been some kind of monster. Though for my personal speculation, I don't think this hints at another boss after Veld. I think these quotes might have been the battle dialogue for the Deadlords. It certainly sounds like some kind of zombie. For some more concrete unused text, there's an entire cut timeline narrating the events leading up to the start of Thracia. This is the only place that reveals Seliph and Leif's full names. Which is nice to know because that's where Leif gets the fake name he tells Hannibal. The game also has an entire cut tutorial mode, similar to the one in Sacred Stones. Yes, Thracia, a game infamous for all of its mechanics being obtuse, would have had an in-game explanation of these mechanics, but it got cut. Your confusion is also mine. Besides the developers taking a shot at online strategy guides, there's some evidence of unused or scrap mechanics here. One tutorial entry references a convoy and specifically says they plan to scrap it. The dance tutorial says it refreshes all adjacent allies. This is how it worked in Genealogy, but in Thracia it only refreshes one. The hint section regarding stealing mentions staves and items having no weight so they can be stolen easily. While this is true of items in the final game, they did end up giving staves weight. Maybe they thought being able to freely swipe status staves was too broken. And now a mechanic that is less unused as it is not utilized to its full potential. Thracia was the first Fire Emblem game to use the Weapon Experience system that would become standard for the rest of the series. Every swing of a weapon gives you 1 weapon experience, and every 50 weapon experience increases your rank with that weapon. Simple, right? Well, not really. Because it turns out Thracia actually supports variable growth rates for weapon experience of each weapon type. You just won't notice this for 2 reasons. 1, every playable character has a 100% weapon growth in every weapon type, even those they can't use. And 2, enemies can gain weapon experience and, theoretically, weapon rank ups too. But most enemies have their weapon experience growth rates set at only 20%. That's right, a 20% chance of them gaining 1 weapon experience per swing, of which they need 50. The odds of the same enemy attacking you that many times is extremely low. So low that it's hard to prove this is a real mechanic. That's what I would say if I didn't have a certain someone to help me out. The warrior boss of Chapter 12 just so happens to have different growth rates set. He has a 200% growth rate with axe experience and a 0 with everything else. This means, in theory, if he swings his axe 25 times, he should get a weapon rank up. What do you know? It happened! This mechanic could have been interesting if it was actually used properly. It would be a great way to create unit identity, especially between members of the same class. One cavalier could gain sword ranks faster than lance ranks, while another could be the opposite. I really wish a future Fire Emblem did this. I have to credit Zane and his FE5 Tidbits thread from FE Universe for that, and the following information. The banks of map sprites for many magic classes have some bishop frames hidden in them. It's suspected that Bishop was used as the default map sprite for magic classes, and the other sprites were made around it. Thracia has a couple of error screens that are shown if the cartridge fails to boot. The first one is shown the first time it happens, but if the cartridge fails to boot twice in a row, it will assume you're trying to pirate it and display the second screen. I'll spare you the full details of how the game checks for this, except for one I find really funny. Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War was originally going to be named Holy Sword Elm Kaiser. According to an interview, this was because the game at that point was very different to Fire Emblem. Elm is a type of tree and Kaiser means king, so perhaps this refers to the world tree Yggdrasil, which is where the continent gets its name. Now the funny part. Fire Emblem 4's sound engine is labelled Elm internally, but FE5's is labelled FE5. However, when both FE4 and FE5 boot up successfully, they write a single string before the stack. This string? Elm 0. On boot, the game checks whether this string is already written. If it is, the game must have been reset manually, and so the anti-piracy check is skipped. But this explains why hackers poking around sometimes found references to Elmo in a Fire Emblem game's code. And normally I'd end on that much of a high note, but I've got something even better to tell you. Once again, I have to thank Mia from the Little Manster team for this info. They've posted some running patch developer commentary all across my Thracia playthrough, and it's been fascinating. I highly recommend finding and reading their comments. But this detail pertains to the final battle. So, Veld's title in Fire Emblem Heroes, Manfroy's Rock? What if I told you you could make that literal? And all through technically developer-intended mechanics. So, Petrify becomes Fenrir if stolen, but it's not actually a pref weapon. If you can somehow get it onto a Loptrian with A in Dark Tomes without stealing it, and then berserk that Loptrian, they could attack Veld and petrify him. To do this, you need to disarm one of them. That way, they will go over to Veld and take his Petrify Tome. This won't turn it into Fenrir, because the player wasn't the one who stole it. But next, Veld's immune to status as long as he's on a throne, so you'll need to have somebody capture him, and then die so Veld is dropped onto a non-throne tile. Then berserk the Loptrian with Petrify, hope nobody kills him before he attacks Veld, put Veld to sleep to drop his magic to 0 so the enemy targets him, and, fingers crossed you'll have a Veld statue. This might be the most deliciously ironic Fire Emblem villain defeat ever, and I'd love to hear from you if any of you manage to pull it off. With that one last bit of Thracia jank for the road, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Oh right, I promised to show the second arena theme.